They said the christening would be family only. Family only. I thought I understood what that meant until I received that message from my daughter-in-law. "You understand what I want to say," she wrote. The exclusion was deliberate. The humiliation was calculated. But what she didn't know was that I held something in my hands that would change everything. Something that would make her regret ever trying to erase me from my grandson's most important day. The truth was about to come out, and nothing would ever be the same again. I stared at my phone screen for what felt like an eternity, reading those words over and over. "Mother-in-law, the christening will be only close family. You understand what I mean?" My daughter-in-law smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, not the performative one she usually gave me. "I would love that," she said. "Thank you for offering." My son watched this exchange with visible relief on his face. He had been nervous about how the first birthday celebration would go, worried that the tension between the two most important women in his life would ruin the day for his son. But instead, we were taking a small step toward healing, toward building something better. As we sang happy birthday to my grandson, I looked around the table at my family. My daughter was laughing at something my ex-husband had said. My grandson was smashing cake into his face with both tiny hands, delighted by the mess and the attention. My son had his arm around his wife, and she was leaning against him, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen her. For a moment, we were just a family celebrating a milestone, not a collection of people divided by resentment and old wounds. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. But the story doesn't end there. Life is never that simple, and family relationships are never that neat and tidy. Just when I thought we were moving past the christening exclusion, a new crisis emerged. 2 months after my grandson's first birthday, my daughter-in-law called me with news. She had been offered a prestigious job opportunity, one that would require the family to relocate to another city. It was everything she had been working toward professionally, a position that would make her senior manager at a major corporation, significantly more money, better benefits, everything she could want. But it meant leaving behind my son's job, my grandson's daycare, our entire support system. My son called me that evening, conflicted and torn. He wanted to support his wife's career, but he was also worried about uprooting their lives, about leaving the city where we all lived, about what this would mean for his relationship with me and his sister. He was asking me what I thought, whether he should encourage his wife to take the position or ask her to wait for another opportunity. This was a moment when I could have been selfish. This was a moment when I could have asked him to convince his wife to turn down the job, to keep my grandson close to me. This was a moment when the old hurt from the christening exclusion could have risen up, and I could have said, after the way she treated me, "I can't support your family moving away." But I didn't say that. Instead, I told my son exactly what he needed to hear. "Your wife deserves this opportunity. She's worked hard to get here. Yes, it will be difficult for all of us to be separated, but you have to support her career the way you would want her to support yours. Go, take this job. Let her have this achievement." My son was shocked by my response. He had braced himself for guilt trips and emotional manipulation. Instead, he found compassion and understanding. "Really?" he asked, his voice full of surprise. "You think we should go?" "I think you should do what's best for your family," I said. "All 4 of you. That's what matters now. Not what I want. Not what I lost during the christening. What's best for your nuclear family." There was a long pause. "Mom, I don't know what to say. Thank you for understanding, for not making this harder." Over the following weeks, my son and his wife made their decision. They accepted the job offer. They would be moving 3 hours away, far enough that we couldn't do casual visits, close enough that we could still see each other regularly on weekends. It was going to be a significant change for all of us. But here's where my refusal to retaliate, my choice to set boundaries with dignity rather than through financial warfare, paid dividends that I never expected. Because I had been generous in this moment, because I had supported my son's wife's career advancement, something shifted in the family dynamic. My daughter-in-law started treating me with genuine respect. She began to understand that I wasn't the obstacle in her life that she had thought I was. She realized that I could have been that by weaponizing the school's ownership, I could have made their relocation impossible, could have used financial pressure to keep my son close. But I hadn't. And that act of generosity, that choice to put my family's well-being above my own needs, was transformative. How would you act in this situation? Would you have let them go? Before they moved, my son and I had several conversations about the school investment. He finally articulated something that he had never said before. Mom, I know the school is yours. I've always known that. But I also know that you could have done something with that knowledge to hurt me when I needed your support the most. And you didn't. That means everything to me. I realized in that moment that sometimes the most powerful weapon we can possess is our refusal to use the weapons we have. By choosing not to retaliate financially, I had actually built a stronger relationship with my son than I ever could have through manipulation or control. The move happened on a gray October day. I helped them pack boxes. I held my grandson as they loaded the moving truck. I cried as they drove away, but they weren't tears of abandonment or despair. They were tears of a mother who had learned to let go, who had learned that love means sometimes letting people you cherish leave, who had learned that the deepest bonds can survive distance. My daughter-in-law called me from the car as they drove away. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for understanding, for being the bigger person." "Take care of my grandson," I replied. "And yourself. Build your career. Build your life. That's all I want for you." Comment if you know someone who chose dignity over revenge. The distance turned out to be a gift in unexpected ways. We had video calls with my grandson several times a week. We made special visits where I would spend entire weekends with him. The time we had together was intentional and precious because it was limited. We weren't taking each other for granted anymore. My son visited me alone sometimes, leaving his wife and grandson at home. During one of these visits, he asked me about the school again. "Mom, when you retire completely, what will happen to the school? What's your plan for it?" I had been thinking about this question for months. I had assumed that I would simply sell it eventually, that the money would go to my estate to be divided between my son and daughter. But now I was considering a different option. "I've been thinking about transferring it to you," I told him. "Not as an investment. Not as an asset that you own, but as a legacy. I want you to run it, to continue what I started, to build on what I've built. I want it to become your life's work the way it was mine." My son looked stunned. "You would do that?" "I would do that," I confirmed. "Because you've proven that you're not the kind of person who takes things for granted. You're not the kind of person who would destroy something precious for profit. And I want my legacy to be in your hands. Give it a thumbs up if you think I made the right choice." Time passed. My grandson became 2 years old, then 3. My daughter-in-law gave birth to a second child, a daughter this time. When the baby was born, my daughter-in-law called me before anyone else. "She has your eyes," she said, and there was such warmth in her voice that I knew we had truly moved past the christening exclusion. I went to stay with them for 2 weeks after the baby was born. I helped with nighttime feedings. I held my granddaughter and sang her the same lullabies I had sung to her brother. I cooked meals and did laundry and provided the kind of maternal support that my daughter-in-law had perhaps never experienced before, and I could see her beginning to understand what it meant to have a mother-in-law who was truly on her team. On my last night before returning home, my daughter-in-law came into the kitchen where I was cleaning up after dinner. She had something she wanted to say to me, and I could tell from her expression that it was difficult for her. "I owe you an apology," she began, "for the christening, for the way I treated you over the years, for trying to erase you from my family's life." I set down the dish I was washing and turned to face her fully. "Yes," I said simply, "you do." She took a deep breath. "I was terrified," she continued. "When I became a mother, when I married your son, I was so afraid that I wouldn't be important enough, that I would always be second to you. So I tried to establish myself as the gatekeeper, the one who got to decide who was important and who wasn't. But in doing that, I hurt the one person who could have been my greatest ally." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, curious about what had prompted this change of heart. "Because I've learned what it means to be a mother now," she said. "And I think about how my daughter will feel if I teach her that it's okay to use power to exclude and hurt people you're afraid of. I think about the kind of woman I want her to become. And I realized I had to apologize, properly, not just say the words, but mean them." I pulled her into an embrace. And in that moment, All of the hurt from the christening exclusion finally released its grip on my heart. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because I had transformed it into something else, into wisdom, into compassion, into the kind of strength that comes from choosing forgiveness even when you have the power to demand revenge. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. I forgive you, I said. I forgave you a long time ago, actually. I just needed you to understand what you had done. Now I know that you do. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? That apology changed everything. My relationship with my daughter-in-law transformed from one of careful civility into a genuine friendship. We started having coffee together during my visits. We talked about our lives, our dreams, our fears. She asked me for advice about parenting, about marriage, about how to balance career ambitions with family responsibilities. One afternoon, as we sat in a cafe, she asked me, "Do you ever regret not using the school to hurt my husband? I know you could have. I know you had the power." "Never," I said honestly. Using power to hurt people you love doesn't make you stronger. It makes you smaller. It diminishes you in ways that money and legal victories never could compensate for. The real power comes from knowing you have the ability to destroy someone and choosing not to. She nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's what I needed to learn," she said. That power isn't about excluding people or controlling situations. It's about having choices and making the compassionate one. Now, years later, my relationship with my grandson is everything I had hoped it would be. He knows me. He loves me. He comes to my house for long weekends and calls me during the week. He has my laugh, as his father said. He has my stubbornness. He has my love of learning and reading and thinking deeply about the world. My granddaughter knows me too, even though she was born after all the conflict. She knows me as the grandmother who bakes cakes and tells stories and loves her without reservation or condition. My son transferred to a job in the same city where his wife worked, and they seem genuinely happy now. He comes to see me regularly. He calls to ask for advice. He tells me that he's proud of me, and sometimes he references how I handled the christening crisis as an example of how to be a better person. And my daughter-in-law, she's become like a daughter to me. We send each other messages during the week. We laugh together. We support each other. The woman who tried to exclude me from my grandson's christening has become one of my closest family relationships. Does this mean that what she did was okay? No, it wasn't. The christening exclusion was still a betrayal. The systematic disrespect was still an injustice. But what I learned is that sometimes justice doesn't come from revenge or retaliation. Sometimes it comes from choosing the higher path, from setting boundaries with dignity, and from allowing other people the space to grow and change and become better versions of themselves. The most important thing I learned was this: dignity is not something that others give us. It's something we give ourselves. And once we truly understand that, once we embody it and live it, we become powerful in ways that money or legal documents or family connections could never make us. My grandson, now 6 years old, didn't understand any of this conflict. He didn't know about his mother's cruelty or his father's weakness or his grandmother's resilience during those difficult years. All he knew was that the people around him loved him, and that was enough. That was everything. Do you think I overreacted? Do you think I should have used the school against my son? Comment your thoughts in the section below. And remember, never underestimate anyone. The quiet woman in the background might just be the one holding all the cards. But the real power comes not from holding cards, but from knowing when not to play them. This is the story of how I discovered that true strength lies not in what we can take from others, but in what we choose to give them. It's the story of how choosing compassion over revenge, forgiveness over bitterness, can transform a family. And it's a reminder that we are all capable of change, capable of growth, capable of becoming better than we were yesterday. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it inspires you to choose a higher path in your own life, no matter how tempting it might be to use your power to hurt those who have hurt you. Because in the end, the only person you truly hurt when you choose revenge is yourself. His message hung there like a knife suspended in air. Family only. The words themselves weren't cruel, it was the meaning underneath them that cut through my chest. I understood exactly what she wanted to say, and that was the problem. For 3 years, I had watched my son fall in love, watched him build a life with this woman, watched him become a father. I had been there through it all. I had held my grandson within hours of his birth. I had helped them move into their new apartment. I had cooked meals during those exhausting first months when sleep was a luxury neither of them could afford. And now, for the most sacred moment of his life, his christening, I was being told that I wasn't family enough. My hands trembled as I set the phone down on the kitchen table. The afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating the dust particles that floated aimlessly in the air, much like I felt myself floating without anchor or direction. I had spent 58 years building a life of dignity and respect. I had raised a son who was kind, hardworking, and generous. I had believed that these things meant something, that they counted for something. But in that single message, all of it felt erased. My son called me that evening. "Mom," about the christening, he began, his voice already carrying the weight of what was coming. I didn't let him finish. "Your wife made herself very clear," I said quietly. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't fought for me. He had simply agreed to whatever she wanted. That realization made my heart sink deeper than I thought possible. Over the following weeks, I watched as the event was planned with meticulous attention to detail. Social media posts appeared, photos of dress shopping with her mother and sisters, discussions about the menu at an exclusive restaurant, excited messages about invitations being sent out to everyone who mattered, apparently to everyone except me. I saw pictures of relatives I recognized from family gatherings, people I had known for years, some of whom I had helped through difficult times, cousins, aunts, friends of the family, all of them considered family close enough to attend. But somehow, I, the grandmother, the woman who had changed my grandson's diapers and sung him lullabies, was not. The rejection was methodical and deliberate. When I ran into my daughter-in-law at the supermarket one morning, she greeted me with a bright smile, as if nothing had happened. "How are you?" she asked, her voice warm and friendly, her perfectly manicured hand touching my arm briefly before pulling away. But I could see it in her eyes, the satisfaction of having drawn a boundary that excluded me, the triumph of having succeeded in making herself the gatekeeper of my family. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice steady even as my insides churned with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "Just preparing myself for not being at my grandson's christening." She shifted uncomfortably, the smile faltering for just a moment before she recovered it. "It's just, my family wanted an intimate ceremony." "You understand." I understood perfectly. What I didn't understand was why she felt the need to pretend that this wasn't personal. Why she couldn't simply admit that she didn't want me there. Why she had to hide behind the veil of family preference when what she really meant was that she didn't consider me worthy of witnessing this sacred moment. The lie was almost worse than the exclusion itself. My son came to visit me a few days later. He looked older than his 32 years, worn down by stress and conflict, his eyes carrying the weight of a man torn between two women. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had first read that dreadful message, the same table where we had shared so many meals and conversations over the years. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I argued with her. I really did, but she was adamant. Her family was very particular about who should attend. I watched him struggle with the words, watched him try to justify the unjustifiable, watched him fail to make eye contact with me. I listened as he explained about his wife's parents' preferences, about their traditional beliefs about what a christening should be, about how her mother had been planning this event in her mind since before my grandson was even born. He talked about how important it was to maintain harmony in the household, to not upset his wife during this delicate postpartum period, to keep the family peace. Every excuse felt like another cut, another rejection, another way of telling me that I didn't matter enough to fight for. "Did you tell her that your mother deserves to be there?" I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. He looked away. That was all the answer I needed. He had prioritized his peace with his wife over his loyalty to me. He had chosen the path of least resistance instead of standing up for what was right. And that hurt more than any exclusion ever could. It was a betrayal wrapped in the guise of maintaining harmony. It was cowardice dressed up as compromise. I felt my face burning with shame as I realized that my own son had chosen to let me be humiliated rather than risk an uncomfortable conversation with his wife. The tears welled up in my eyes, and I turned away so he wouldn't see them. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. A lump tightened in my throat as I tried to find words to express the depth of my disappointment in him. Would you do the same in my place? Would you sit silently and accept this humiliation from your own child? The weeks passed slowly, each day feeling longer than the last. I found myself obsessing over the event, checking my daughter-in-law's social media compulsively, looking for any sign of what was being planned, torturing myself with images of the celebration I wouldn't be part of. Each new post felt like a small wound, reopening the larger wound that never quite healed. A photo of the church interior with a caption, "Where our little angel will be blessed by God." A picture of the christening gown hanging in a shop window, white lace and delicate embroidery, so beautiful it made my heart ache. A video of my grandson laughing, his little fists waving in the air, with the words "the star of the event," and I was on the outside, looking in through a glass wall that had been deliberately constructed to keep me out. At night, I would lie awake, my mind replaying every moment, every rejection, every way that she had slowly but surely built this barrier between me and my family. I would imagine what the christening would be like, the ceremony, the photos, the celebration afterward. I would imagine the other family members commenting on how beautiful it all was, how meaningful, how perfect, and I would not be there to see any of it. My daughter called one evening, sensing my distress through the phone line as only a child truly can. We lived in different cities, and distance had always been a challenge to our relationship, but she knew me better than anyone. From the moment I answered the phone, she knew something was wrong. "Mom, what's happened?" she asked, and her voice held such genuine concern that I finally broke down and told her everything. I told her about the message, the exclusion, my son's cowardice, my daughter-in-law's calculated cruelty. I told her about the way I had been systematically erased from the most important event in my grandson's first year of life. As I spoke, I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could sense her own anger rising to meet mine. "That's not right," my daughter said firmly. "That's not right at all, Mom. You're family. You're the grandmother. She can't just..." She stopped abruptly, and I could hear her speaking to someone else. "Dad? Dad? Can you hear me? I'm calling you from Mom's house." I heard my ex-husband's voice come through on the line. We had stayed friends after the divorce, something that had always confused our children but which now seemed almost irrelevant against the backdrop of this present crisis. "Hi there. What's going on?" he asked. My daughter explained the situation to him carefully, laying out the facts of what had happened, describing the message and the exclusion and the way my son had handled it. As she spoke, I could feel the familiar mix of emotions that came from involving my ex-husband in family matters, gratitude that he was still a part of our lives, mixed with a certain embarrassment that I needed his intervention. "That's unacceptable," my ex-husband said finally, his voice firm and authoritative in a way that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him all those years ago. "That's completely unacceptable. When is the christening?" My daughter gave him the date. "I'm going," he said. "I'm going to be there. And if I'm invited, then she absolutely should be invited. She's the grandmother. She's family. This is ridiculous." The next morning, my ex-husband called my son. I didn't hear the conversation directly, but my son called me afterward, his voice different, more resolute, perhaps a bit angry at being confronted by his father about what he had allowed to happen. "Mom, about the christening, I've decided something. I want you there. You're my mother. You deserve to be there. I should have fought harder for this from the beginning. The victory should have felt sweet, but it tasted bitter in my mouth. I had needed my ex-husband to intervene. I had needed a man's voice to carry weight where my own voice had been dismissed. My son had listened to me plead, had understood my pain, and had said nothing, done nothing. But when his father made the same argument, suddenly it had value. Suddenly it was worthy of action. The injustice of this reality struck deep, a reminder of how the world often works for women, especially aging women whose voices are too easily dismissed. My daughter-in-law called me that evening, and I could hear the frustration barely contained beneath her polite tone, like a hiss just barely contained within her words. "We've reconsidered," she said stiffly. We'd like to have you at the christening after all. We realized it was important to your son. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the pain she had caused me. She didn't express any regret for the weeks I had spent in humiliation and despair. She simply acted as if this had all been a misunderstanding, a minor scheduling conflict that had now been resolved through the intervention of the appropriate male authority. I should have been grateful. That's what I told myself during that conversation. A normal person would have been grateful to be included after being excluded. A normal person would have accepted the victory and moved forward. But instead, I felt something else entirely, a cold, crystalline anger that had been forming in my chest for weeks, growing sharper and more defined with each passing day. This woman had deliberately tried to erase me from one of the most important moments of my life. And now, because she had been forced to back down by my son's father, she expected me to pretend that nothing had happened, that no harm had been done, that we could simply move on as if this exclusion was a minor blip in our relationship. I thanked her coldly and hung up the phone. My hands were shaking with contained rage. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I had been forced to be grateful for being allowed back into a family event that should have never excluded me in the first place. The indignity of it all felt almost worse than the original exclusion. Comment if you know someone like this, someone who uses exclusion as a weapon and then expects gratitude when they deign to include you. The night before the christening, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every humiliation, every slight, every moment of disrespect over the past 3 years. There had been so many small moments that I had overlooked, moments that I had dismissed as misunderstandings or personality conflicts, moments that I had chosen to forgive in the interest of family harmony. She had criticized my cooking at family dinners, leaning over the pot and saying, "It's a bit heavy for modern tastes," with a tight smile that suggested she was offering helpful advice rather than subtle criticism. She had suggested that my way of holding the baby was outdated, saying, "They recommend a different technique now," and then gently taking my grandson from my arms as if I were incapable of holding him properly. She had made comments about my appearance, telling me that certain colors weren't flattering for someone my age, comments about my relevance in my son's life, suggesting that now that he was married, he had moved on to his real family. She had started small, these little cuts, these paper cuts of disrespect that individually seemed insignificant but that collectively added up to a pattern of systematic humiliation. Each one was easy enough to overlook. Each one could be explained away as being misunderstood or oversensitive on my part. But the christening exclusion had been different. It had been the breaking point. It had been the moment when her disdain for me had moved from subtle manipulation to outright cruelty, to a direct statement that I was not welcome, that I didn't matter, that I could be erased from the most important moments of my grandson's life, and it wouldn't matter because I was expendable. I got out of bed at 3 in the morning and went to my study. The house was quiet, silent in the way that only houses are quiet in the deep hours of the night. On my shelf, there was a box of documents, the remnants of my past life as a teacher and principal, before I had retired 8 years ago. Inside were contracts, letters of recommendation, financial records, board meeting minutes, renovation plans. I had been the principal of a private school for 25 years. I had built that school from nothing, expanded it, made it one of the most respected educational institutions in the region. Parents drove their children from neighboring cities to attend my school. The curriculum was innovative. The faculty was exceptional. The results were undeniable. My son had been born during those years when I was building the school. I had struggled to balance motherhood with career, and I had made sacrifices, long hours, missed soccer games, school assemblies attended by my ex-husband instead of me. But I had been present in the ways that mattered. I had been involved. I had been proud of what I was building, both in my professional life and in my family life. Years later, when my son was grown and established in his own career, he had decided to invest in my school. He wanted to be part of what I had built. He wanted to contribute to something meaningful. He put money into renovations, into expanding the facilities, into buying new equipment for the science labs and technology centers. He helped me modernize the curriculum and hire new faculty members. He had assumed that his investment meant he was becoming a stakeholder, that he was building equity, that this was something he would eventually own a piece of. But the reality was more complicated than he had believed. Years ago, when I had first started the school, I had carefully kept the deed and all the property ownership in my name. This had been deliberate. This had been strategic. This had been my way of ensuring that my life's work, my legacy, remained under my control, that no matter what happened in my personal life, no matter what financial pressures or family conflicts arose, the school would always be mine. I pulled out a particular document, the original deed to the property where the school was located. My name was on it, signed in ink that had faded slightly over the decades. The school building, the land, all of it was registered under my name. When I had retired, I had transferred the management of daily operations to a board of directors, but I had never transferred the deed. I had kept that card close to my chest. My son had invested in that school believing that he owned a stake in it. He had consulted with the board about expansion plans. He had been involved in strategic decisions about the school's future. He had introduced himself to donors as someone with a financial interest in the school's success. But legally, contractually, factually, he didn't own anything. The deed was mine. I had kept it that way deliberately. And though we had discussed this arrangement many years ago when he first wanted to invest, it seemed that in the intervening years, he had conveniently forgotten this fact. I sat there in my study at 3 in the morning, holding that deed in my hands, and I felt the weight of what I was considering. My breath came in shallow gasps. My hands trembled. My face felt flushed with a mixture of rage and something else, something that felt like power, like control, like I was finally holding a card that mattered. If I used this information, if I let my son know that his investment in the school had never actually been his investment, that his ownership stake was illusory, that he had been essentially donating money to my personal asset for years, I would be adding a financial betrayal to his emotional betrayal. It seemed fitting, in a cold and calculating way. It seemed like justice. I could restructure the school's finances. I could legally reduce his returns, change the structure of the investment, withdraw his capital contributions. I could make it clear that while his money had been appreciated, it had never actually been an investment in something he could claim ownership of. I could hurt him the way he had hurt me. I could make him understand, through his wallet and his pride, what it felt like to be excluded, dismissed, and treated as expendable. How would you act in this situation? Would you do the same? I spent hours that night going through the documents, reviewing the original agreements, remembering the conversations from years past. My lawyer had told me that I had every legal right to do this. My lawyer had told me that I could liquidate, restructure, or transfer the school at will. The law was on my side. But I didn't pull the trigger that night. Instead, as the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, I put the documents back in their box and returned to bed. I lay there, exhausted but unable to sleep, and I tried to think clearly about what I was considering. I thought about my grandson, who at only 9 months old was already becoming a person with his own personality, his own preferences, his own way of smiling at the world. I thought about what I was teaching him if I pursued this path of retaliation. I thought about the message I would be sending if I chose financial revenge over family healing. The morning of the christening arrived gray and drizzling. I put on the navy dress I had bought weeks ago, before I knew I wouldn't be allowed to attend, and I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked older than I remembered being. The lines around my eyes seemed deeper. My hair, which I had always worn long, looked thinner somehow. I had aged in the past few weeks, visibly aged under the stress of this family conflict. I should have been grateful. That's what I kept telling myself as I drove to the church. I should have been grateful that I had been included, grateful that my son had finally stood up to his wife, grateful that I would get to be there after all. But the gratitude wouldn't come. What came instead was a kind of hollow resignation, the feeling of having won a battle but lost something essential in the process. The church was beautiful. Flowers lined the altar, white roses and lilies, so fragrant that the perfume seemed to fill the entire space. The priest stood waiting, his vestments pristine, his expression serene. My grandson looked like a tiny angel in his white christening gown, his skin pink and perfect, his eyes wide with the unfocused wonder of an infant experiencing the world. I stood in the back of the church, next to my ex-husband as instructed. I wasn't prominent enough to stand with the immediate family. My daughter sat on the other side of me, her hand squeezing mine, silently expressing her support and solidarity. My son and his wife stood at the front, presenting their son to God and the community. When it came time for the grandmother to hold the baby, my daughter-in-law glanced back at me, a question in her eyes, as if she was genuinely uncertain whether I would participate in this moment. I stepped forward. I took my grandson in my arms, and in that moment, all of the anger, all of the pain, all of the rage that I had been carrying fell away. He was so small, so vulnerable, so completely innocent of all the family drama that had been swirling around him. He didn't choose his mother's behavior. He didn't choose his father's weakness. He didn't choose the conflict that was tearing his family apart. All he had done was arrive in the world and be loved by people who didn't always know how to love each other well. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. After the service, there was a reception at an exclusive restaurant. I stayed for an hour and a half, longer than I had initially planned, listening to relatives I hadn't seen in months congratulate my son, admire the baby, comment on how much he looked like his father or his mother depending on their family loyalty. My daughter-in-law circulated through the crowd, playing the perfect daughter-in-law, the proud mother, the gracious hostess. She had won. The exclusion had been forced to reverse, but in reversing it, she had made it clear who held the power in this family, who got to decide who was included and who was excluded. At one point, she approached me with a glass of champagne. "Thank you for coming," she said, using that particular tone that marked me as an outsider, as someone on the periphery of the family rather than at its center. It meant a lot to my husband, and to the baby. There was no warmth in her voice. There was no genuine gratitude. There was only the performance of gratitude, the acting out of the role that social convention required her to play. I accepted the glass but didn't drink it. "I wouldn't have missed it," I said quietly, the words carefully chosen. "He's my grandson. I will always be there for him, regardless of what anyone else wants or doesn't want." She smiled, and in that smile, I saw no remorse, no understanding of what she had done. No acknowledgement of the pain she had caused me. No recognition that her deliberate exclusion had violated something fundamental about family bonds. She had forced me out, and then she had pulled me back in through the intervention of my ex-husband, and she expected me to be grateful for the opportunity to be included on her terms, to be thankful that she had deigned to allow me back into the life of my own grandson. That night, I made a decision. I called my lawyer. The school that I had built over 25 years was generating significant revenue. The tuition was high because the institution was exclusive and well-regarded. The parents who send their children there were willing to pay for quality. My son had invested in the school as an act of support. Yes, but he had also expected it to be a sound financial investment. The board of directors had promised him returns. But those returns were complicated by the fact that his ownership stake was promised but never formalized. My lawyer reviewed the deed over the phone. "This is entirely yours," she confirmed. "If you wanted to, you could liquidate it, sell it, transfer it to someone else entirely. Your son has no legal claim to it or its proceeds." "What if I wanted to reduce his returns significantly?" I asked. "Is there a way to do that?" My lawyer paused. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "There are ways," she said slowly, "but I want to ask you a question first." "Why? Why are you asking me this?" I told her everything. I told her about the christening exclusion, about the systematic disrespect, about the way I had been treated as if I were an inconvenience rather than family. I told her about the exclusion message, about my son's failure to stand up for me, about my daughter-in-law's cruelty. As I spoke, I heard my own words and realized how they sounded bitter, vengeful, petty, small. I heard myself and was ashamed of what I was becoming. My lawyer listened without interrupting, letting me pour out the entire story, all of my pain and rage and sense of injustice. When I finished, she set down her pen. "You could do this," she said carefully. "You could legally reduce his returns, change the structure of the investment, and it would all be within your rights. Nobody could stop you." The law is entirely on your side. But let me ask you another question. Will it make you happy? Will it make your life better? Will it make you feel less hurt? I didn't answer immediately. I knew what the answer was, and it frightened me. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about my options constantly. I could retaliate financially. I could hurt my son the way he had hurt me. I could make him regret his choice to prioritize his wife's preferences over his mother's dignity. I could teach him a lesson that he would never forget. But then my grandson turned 3 months old, and my son sent me a video. It was taken on his phone, shaky and informal, shot in what looked like their apartment living room. My grandson was laughing, his little mouth open wide, his eyes scrunched shut in pure joy, his tiny body shaking with the effort of expressing his delight. And my son's voice was in the background, narrating, "That's Grandma's laugh. You have Grandma's laugh, little one. You're going to be just like her when you grow up. You're going to be smart and strong and independent, just like your grandma." I watched that video 17 times, and I wept. I realized something in that moment that changed everything. My grandson didn't choose his mother's behavior. He didn't choose his father's weakness. He didn't choose the family drama that was unfolding around him like some kind of toxic plant spreading poison through the soil. All he had done was arrive in the world and be loved by people who didn't always know how to love each other well. He was innocent. He was blameless. And whatever pain existed between the adults in his life, he deserved to grow up in an environment where his grandmother was not consumed by rage and revenge. If I retaliated against my son financially, I would be teaching my grandson that love was transactional. That respect had to be enforced through punishment and financial manipulation. That family relationships were ultimately about power and money and who could hurt whom the most effectively. That betrayal was justified if it was motivated by good intentions or if you felt wronged. I would be teaching him that violence, even financial violence, even legal violence, was an acceptable response to emotional pain. I didn't want to teach him that. I didn't want that to be my legacy. I called my lawyer back. "I've decided not to pursue the financial restructuring," I told her quietly, "but I do want to make something clear and documented. I want to formally establish in writing that my son's investment in the school has never been registered as an ownership stake. I want it on record, in legal documents, that he was told this would happen years ago, and he agreed to it at the time. I want this documented because I don't want there to be any ambiguity or future conflict, no misunderstandings that could tear my family apart even further." My lawyer was quiet for a long moment. "You're protecting yourself," she said finally, understanding what I was doing. "You're creating a legal record that protects you from future disputes." "I'm protecting my family," I corrected her. "All of them, including my son and his wife, even if they don't understand that yet. Even if they don't appreciate it. Even if they never know how close I came to doing something that would have destroyed us all." I met with my son and explained the situation to him calmly and clearly. I showed him the original documents from 25 years ago, when we had first discussed this arrangement over coffee in my office at the school. I showed him the email where I had explicitly explained how the school ownership worked, and I showed him his response email where he had acknowledged and agreed to these terms. I reminded him that he had known then that the deed was in my name only. I told him that his returns would continue as promised, but that there could be no claim on the property itself. To my surprise, he reacted with relief rather than anger. His face actually relaxed as I explained it to him.